So welcome everybody. Welcome to this International Intersex Virtual Forum about how to be a good intersex ally. My name is Tony Briffa and I am the chair of ILGA World's Intersex Committee, and I am also the other Executive Director of Intersex Human Rights Australia. I will be moderating this session with support from my friend and colleague, Marnie Mitchell. It's great to have her here. As I mentioned, we have a large number of attendees here today. We have 230 registered people and a very good, incredible panel, and I'm very grateful for each one of them for being willing to participate in this tonight. Well, tonight where I am, it's 11 o'clock here in Melbourne. Translation is being provided in Spanish and English. Please use the translation button in Zoom and select the language that you would like to hear. This session is also being recorded and will be made available via the ILGA World YouTube channel after this. The session will start with presentations from each speaker for up to 10 minutes each, and after that we will have a panel discussion where you can ask questions. We're also happy to answer your questions along the way, so feel free to use the Q&A or the chat section there and post your questions to panel members. We can answer questions while we go and also pick some questions during the Q&A session after the panel or during the panel. So a bit of an introduction for those of you new to all of this. So intersex people are people born with physical sex characteristics that don't fit the medical norms for female and male bodies. We have many different types of bodies and lived experiences, and like the rest of the population, intersex people can be heterosexual, we can be cisgender, we could be LGBTQA+, we could be disabled, we could be youth, we could be aged, we could live in many different cultures, speak different languages, and have various religions. Intersex people are a natural part of human diversity, and we exist everywhere and throughout nature and probably throughout time. For decades, brave intersex activists have revealed the severe human rights violations intersex people are subjected to across the globe. However, it is only recently that those human rights violations have received increased attention in both national and international human rights discourses. Often, mainstream human rights actors have a lot of goodwill and good intentions to help end these appalling and harmful practices, but they lack the background and knowledge to advocate and engage in these issues. And we know that there's a lot of interest from many members of the LGBT community in particular that want to learn more about intersex people, want to learn about our human rights movement, and want to help support us and amplify our voices. This webinar is about how to be a good intersex ally and about our rights. It is about how to build your own knowledge, how to avoid common traps and shortfalls, and how to empower intersex human rights defenders and activists without taking their space in human rights discourses. The first presentation tonight will be by Irene Kuzemko. Irene is another dear friend of mine and an intersex activist from Russia. Bear with me. Sorry, we're just sharing screens. From Russia and the Ukraine. She's co-founder of Intersex Russia, OII Russia, secretary of OII Europe, and a member of Interact Youth. Irene will present how to be a great intersex ally, a toolkit for NGOs and decision makers, which is a toolkit made by OII Europe. Thank you very much, Irene.
Thank you so much, Tony, and hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you. And yeah, no pressure to be the first speaker, like no pressure at all. But it's my pleasure today to be at this event and also to present the Standing Up for Human Rights of Intersex People, How Can You Help? Toolkit by my amazing colleague, Dan Christian Gatas, the Executive Director of OII Europe. And just a few words about how this toolkit came into life, how it actually happened. As you may know, 2015 has been the landmark year for intersex rights, with the legislation in Malta protecting the bodily autonomy of intersex children, of course, and also the two very important documents, the Human Rights and Intersex People paper by the Commissioner of Human Rights of the Council of Europe. I have it right here, and also the Fundamental Rights Situation of Intersex People paper by the UN Agency for Fundamental Rights. So with so much happening for intersex rights at this point, there has been seen a really huge demand for information for intersex allies and a growing base of allies who really wanted to help, but also learn how to do it correctly, how to support intersex people. And since there has always been an amazing collaboration between OI Europe and ILGA Europe, even before OI Europe was officially founded, this amazing collaboration really led to the existence of this amazing toolkit. So the idea first initially came from ILGA, and they were also able to support the creation of it, so financially and also by providing proofreading. Yeah, so it would not have been possible without ILGA Europe. So yeah, it was an amazing collaboration. And this toolkit was written by then Christian Gattas, and he did really an amazing job on providing like a entire package of the entire information that an ally would need. So if you go through this toolkit, as you can see, it's available in 13 languages, and you can easily find it if you go to Europe's website. You can click the picture on the right, and you can also find it on your ILGA Europe's website as well. And yeah, just to show an example of the complete package of information that it is there, it starts with a chapter about being intersex in Europe, and it really goes through all of the basic information. It talks about who are intersex people, what are the main problems that we encounter, what it's like for us to live in Europe today. And it goes through human rights violations that unfortunately still happen to intersex people. It talks about access to healthcare, education, employment, discrimination in different areas, legal rights situation, legal recognition, and also provides the current legal situation in Europe, providing information from different countries. So it also talks about data collection and mental health and funding of the intersex community. So it really provides a really complete base of who intersex people are, what are our rights like, and how they are being violated. So really, it starts with a very condensed but also very informative chapter. And then it goes into the second FAQ chapter, which goes through so many questions that an ally or anyone who encounters the topic of intersex can have. So it covers so many questions and areas, from like how many people are intersex, and what gender intersex people are, and what do intersex people think of DSD, the medical terminology, or the third gender marker. So it really covers all the questions that people might have. And then in the third chapter, the toolkit goes into specific recommendations on how you can help. And it talks about specific steps that people can do while including intersex rights into their work and integrating the I by not just adding the letter, but actually doing the work and providing intersex people the space and the platform and listening to them, and yeah, really including them in their work. And yeah, just by following the rule, nothing about us without us, allies can do amazing work, and this toolkit provides some really specific examples and some really helpful information. And the toolkit also ends with the annexes and links and resources and contacts. So if you go through this toolkit, you will also find links to important human rights documents, as well as resources and important papers. And yeah, as I said again, you can find it on Europe's website, but also on our website, you can find the OI Europe map, which shows like more recent developments and situations in the countries of Europe in terms of intersex rights, as well as also there is a document which includes the list of all important human rights documents. And yeah, just to show you, oh, I wanted to just show my screen. And yes, just to give you an example of some pages in the toolkit, you can see some of them that it features a lot of questions, a lot of information about many different topics. It has a lot of questions answered, questions that maybe sometimes people are too shy to ask. It gives all the answers. And again, what can you do to help? It provides specific answers and specific things that LGBT activists or any ally policymaker can do. And yes, then it also talks through specific human rights bodies references to intersex, as I said, recommendations of the Commission on Human Rights of the Council of Europe, and also provides and yes, still is available in hopefully be in it language as well. And yeah, it's just my pleasure to share this toolkit by my amazing friend Dan Christian Gatas. I really encourage you to read it. And yeah, it was also read by some intersex people before it was printed. So yeah, it's just a great resource. I personally has done the Russian translation, which is also really great. So yeah, I just encourage you to look for that resource and yeah, take into account what is said there. I don't really have anything much to add at this point. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody. And yeah, I will give the floor back to Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene. Looks like a wonderful resource. Irene will provide the link in the Q&A session. I see that we have a question about where the website is, so Irene will answer that. Please feel free to go and have a look at that, and feel free to contact OII Europe if you have any questions. Our next speaker is honestly a wonderful ally to intersex people. Of course, I'm speaking about Victor Madrigal-Bolos. He is UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. As you can see by the title, it doesn't include intersex, but he's certainly a very strong ally of intersex human rights. And I know that he's probably sick of me mentioning it to him every time we meet. But he's an incredibly supportive person, and I know every opportunity he gets to support us, he does. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Victor to speak to us. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Tony, and I'm looking at you to make sure that you can hear me well.
I sure can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's very touching to me, Tony, that you introduced me in such a friendly and caring manner. I really appreciate that. And the reason for that is, as you know, I take enormous pride in being somebody who has been shown why it is important to be careful not to actually operate on certain automaticity when coming to the rights and the lived realities of particular populations or communities or groups and even persons when developing the work. And so I'm really touched, and thank you very much for your very kind introduction when speaking today. I say good morning, and I'm saying good morning from the Pacific Coast in Costa Rica. I know that others, it will be the end of the day, and then the scope of in between. These are the realities of this interconnected world. I wanted to share with you, when I got the invitation to this event, I immediately felt a big sense of duty and also a little bit of trepidation. I don't consider myself as being somebody who began being a good ally to the intersex persons and communities. And the reason for that is because I began my work in a situation at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, when in already 2009 we began working for a work plan for the rights of LGBT persons. And at that moment, in 2009, I remember very clearly having done the mistake of automatically including an I to that acronym without proper reflection of what exactly were the particular consequences and assumptions that we were implying by doing that. And of course, that would be my first line of thought in relation to this. As you very accurately mentioned, Tony, intersex persons, like everybody else, have a sexual orientation and gender identity. However, this does not imply that work on sexual orientation and gender identity perspectives automatically addresses the problematic faced by intersex persons. Just to be absolutely clear, and given that I expect that a number of the people in this attending this panel are persons interested to learn on the different aspects that come on this realm. Sexual orientation relates to the capacity to feel and the reality, the human reality of feeling profound love and sexual desire, sexual attraction to individuals, be it of the same sex, a different sex, or both. Gender identity relates to the deeply felt experience of identifying with the gender expression, mannerism, and identity assigned at a particular point in time and place to that social construct that is understood as gender itself. And again, as we know, these are traits that are possessed by every individual on Earth. It's a very human trait, a most human trait, to have sexual orientation and gender identity. And this is by no means indicative of whether a person is intersex or not. And the first mistake that gets done, in my view, and that I have done it, and therefore I have hopefully learned from it, is that by working on sexual orientation issues and gender identity issues, you're not addressing necessarily the particular problematic faced by intersex persons because of their sex characteristics, which is, of course, the thing that reunites persons that belong to that community, category, or population, which we refer to today as intersex persons. Now, that would be my first lesson learned that I would like to share with others. And I learned it, I would say, in a very hard way by making that mistake and then being called on it by people in the intersex community and population who graciously allowed me to learn exactly why it was that work on SOGI, as sexual orientation and gender identity realm, is no does not automatically imply addressing and indeed hoping to work to improve the problematic faced by intersex persons. Secondly, I think, Tony, that there is a reality on not only not making assumptions and resisting bias, but I think also there must be a will and an intent to resist the I would describe as tokenization or in any way the use of intersex issues to actually bring strength to arguments and to bring to light arguments that actually pertain to other problematics or other agendas. I want to be very clear in relation to this. It is very often that I see persons actually using intersex lives to prove the point as to why gender is fluid, for example,
Yeah.
or to prove the point as to why it is that certain aspects of gender identity need to be acknowledged as not set in stone in the binary, for example. And although this may seem like an easy route to take and sometimes valid, because we may have the temptation of feeling that the end justifies the means, in this case, I would very respectfully but also forcefully establish that the end does not justify the means, because it blurs the issue and it gives the impression to stakeholders that issues are being addressed when indeed they are not being addressed. Using intersex lives to prove particular arguments in relation to gender fluidity or non-adherence to the binary only confounds the issues that gender characteristics are not about deeply felt identities of social construct. They are about configurations. And as is very well established now by members of the intersex community, they are about sex characteristics and particular threads of work in the issue of sex characteristics. So I would say it is important to develop the discipline and the respect, not to use intersex bodies in our arguments concerning gender identity and the lack of adherence to particular binaries in gender identity. As we know, there's a very important difference, because gender is what we understand as a social construct, and therefore not at all related in this aspect with sex characteristics, although certain of the violations suffered by intersex persons will of course relate to conceptions about how gender should manifest itself and relate to particular bodily configurations and characteristics. But it's not at all the same problematic, and one that I think it's very important, as I say, to have the discipline to identify and to very respectfully not use in our argumentations as such. I think the third lesson that I'd like to share in the way that I try to behave in my work is there is also a need to understand where is it that synergies and common energy can be created in a work that does have a lot to do with deconstructing and destructing stigma around the way in which people's genital configurations should determine their lives. And I would advocate that in this particular sense, there is a lot in common by the different fights that we all are taking in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity and sex characteristics. And is this idea that to certain genital configurations and perhaps even chromosomic realities, there should be certain consequences in social life and in the fate that people have. And I think in this, there is a strong commonality where we can build common areas of work. Because, of course, I think it is my theory that what we are all working for is to ensure that we as individuals, we can be truly free to determine our own lives and our own fate, and that there should be no particular determination in the way we were constructed biologically to what our spirit is able to achieve through our free will and our free action. And this most basic of aspirations, Tony and colleagues, is I think what unites us all, is the ability to, in a way, transcend determinations based on bodily configurations and sexual orientation and gender identity, and actually be free to determine our own fate. And I think in this acknowledging that this is a common aspiration of all people subjected to discrimination is a most fundamental message, but one that unites not only people subjected to discrimination because of sexual orientation and gender identity, but also those subjected to discrimination because of particular conditions of living with disability or race or sex or socioeconomic status. And then we get on to the most, of course, fundamental and valuable of dispositions in international human rights law, which is, why is the principle of non-discrimination the thing that unites us all, the thing that unites all of our fights? Having said this, I would like to acknowledge what I think is in common after that experience at the Inter-American Commission. In my dialogue and my conversations when starting the mandate, I um, having dialogue and really working together, intersex activists and intersex communities and populations has been one of the most valuable elements in the construction of my approach to the mandate. And it's throughout this conversation and this dialogue that I have understood where lie the opportunities for joint work and where lie the areas where messaging that my work does not necessarily cover the problematic of intersex persons has been most important and valuable. And one of those points of contact, Tony and colleagues, that I have found is, of course, in the work around the Yogyakarta principles, where, as you know, the work of activists and experts with lived experience and expertise in relation to intersex issues created a significant space of work in relation to issues having to do with sex characteristics. So I would invite everyone in this call to also have the Yogyakarta principles as point of reference in relation to these issues. They include formulations and lived experience and expertise from members of the intersex community and population. And I think in a very valuable way, they bring clarity as to how some of these issues work. The other thing that I would very quickly allow myself to do is to make reference to the work of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in relation to these issues. Since 2015, the office has been working on a thread of work in relation to these issues, where they took point of departure in an expert meeting in 2015. And very recently, last year, and this is just to kind of complement the wonderful panorama provided by Irene, the office issued a background note on the lived realities and human rights problematics that are faced by intersex communities, populations, and persons. And I would like to just make mention that I found particularly appropriate the way that this background note issued by the High Commissioner tackles the issue. It tackles it as essentially and fundamentally intersectional issue, meaning it's not the realm of any particular mandate or remit within the human rights sector, but rather the common concern of a multiplicity of mandates, including but not limited to the mandate concerning, of course, gender identity, the framework of the fight against torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, the frameworks of right to truth, which are particularly fundamental in accessing medical record and medical histories. Of course, the framework of gender identity, where preconceptions about how gender should look in bodies, in human bodies, play a role in the way intersex persons suffer violations, and also the framework of entitlements and protections in relation to persons living with disabilities, all of these combining themselves to form a particularly rich ground to explore and to take forward the work on the protection of intersex persons from discrimination and violence. My mandate will always remain alert to any work that we can do and where we can actually add our voice and the weight of the mandate to ensuring that intersex persons do not suffer the heinous and heartbreaking violations that we know are perpetrated every day around the world. And on this, I hope that you know that I'm not only an ally, but I hope very much to be somebody who learns from the intersex persons and communities every day how to work together with you in ensuring this most human of endeavors, which is ending this type of violence and discrimination. I'm humbled and delighted to be here with you today, and I look forward to learning through the conversation. Thank you so much, Tony.
Victor, as I was just saying, thank you very much for that really warm, very genuine discussion with us. We really appreciate your work and your love. You are a wonderful ally, and I hope that when people do make mistakes, even about using the I when they don't, that we don't jump on them like a ton of bricks, but that we're patient with them and that we gently explain the situation, because we ruin the opportunity for these people to be our allies when we do that. So I'm sorry if there was any of that in the beginning, but I'm certainly very grateful that you're very strong, genuine ally now. Thank you. Okay, and now the next person on the next speaker, we have Rosalind Joy Noonan and Tane Polkinghorne, both from New Zealand. Rosalind is a retired Chief New Zealand Human Rights Commissioner, and Tane Polkinghorne is the Human Rights Advisor, SOGIESC, in New Zealand there as well. So I'll ask Rosalind perhaps to speak, and then Tane to follow. Thank you, Rosalind, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's realising how late it is there in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Or is it early?
Early. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I've greeted you in the first language of Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Māori. Warm greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and it is the very early hours of the morning here. And I am going to try and share my screen. Let me just see if it's come up. What have I done? Come on, come on. Is it optimize? Oh, share. Sorry, I always forget that last bit. Good. Okay. And so first of all, I just did want to say that it is a real privilege and honor to be invited to participate in this extraordinary webinar. And I think it's an incredible achievement that in these very difficult times, you've been able to continue in the work of the global intersex community and to reach out to people all around the world. And it is quite special. I'm probably not at my best at 1 a.m. in the morning, or as it is now 1:30 a.m., but it is, I do feel very honored to be here. And I just wanted to use the short time before I hand over to Tane to focus on the role of national human rights institutions as potentially good allies, and they certainly should be a good ally. I came to learn about the situation of intersex people really only when I came to the Human Rights Commission. I was aware, I knew a little, but perhaps like Victor, I had so much more to learn. But just before I sort of go into a little bit more depth about that, I wanted to highlight why national human rights institutions should be an ally. And there are currently about 114. So in many countries around the world, but not all, they're internationally recognized by the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights as a critical element in linking the international human rights standards to the national environment. They have to be established by constitution or statute. They have to have a broad mandate to promote and protect human rights. They've got to cover all the human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, civil and political, economic, social and cultural. and they are an institution of the state, but independent of the government of the day. And that's critical. So they're more attuned to an independent judiciary, although they don't have the same powers as a judiciary. They should have powers to receive complaints and to investigate them. And this is critical. They must be accessible to everyone, including, and that obviously includes intersex people. And their functions include not only handling complaints, etc., but also providing advice, research, and encouraging the provision of human rights education. So wherever you are, it's worth checking, is there a national human rights institution? Some of them are more visible and more active than others, but they should be a critical ally for intersex people. In terms of establishing relationships, again, I wanted to take this opportunity to emphasize the importance of civil society organizations. When we look at what are the elements that contribute to a vibrant human rights culture in any country, the critical element in my view are the civil society organizations who advocate for their communities, who advocate for the most marginalized, for those who suffer stereotyping, who advocate for those who are homeless, who advocate across the whole range of human rights. And in the context of New Zealand, there has been an outstanding contribution by Marnie Mitchell and the New Zealand Intersex Trust. And they have demonstrated what can be done even by a very small number of people initially, with courage, with persistence. I mean, in the New Zealand context, Marnie and the Intersex Trust really have been responsible for ensuring that the issues facing intersex people are actually now on the national agenda. And in looking at the role of civil society organizations, personally, I think, and I'll come to this in a moment, national human rights institutions have a responsibility to reach out. But the reality is that in many cases, that won't necessarily happen automatically. And the role of civil society organizations of connecting with allies within an agency like a Human Rights Commission or an Ombudsman's office is critical. And in the New Zealand case, I was very fortunate to have, over the 10 years that I was Chief Human Rights Commissioner, to have two commissioners who were very strong advocates in the LGBT community, and who also acknowledged the importance of and helped the rest of us learn about the importance of recognizing the intersex community as having their own issues separate from, but intersecting, as Victor has explained, with issues relating to sexual orientation and gender identity, but also other human rights issues. And I think as important as Warren Lindbergh and Joy Liddicoat were, perhaps even more important was that there was a staff member, so somebody with a permanent and ongoing position in the Commission, who was a brilliant ally for the intersex community. And that was Jack Byrne, and in our case, and he was, his ability to do the research, to listen and to support the intersex community, and to ensure in a sense, to call the Human Rights Commission to account was critical. And the other thing, and that in the New Zealand context, the Intersex Trust and Māni have done, is to assert the visibility of intersex people and their right to participate in the decisions that affect them and in the wider decisions of our society and what's required to make it a fair and just society. So what are the responsibilities of national human rights institutions if they're to be a good ally to intersex people? Well, they have a responsibility to identify those who are most vulnerable to human rights abuses and those who are often in the least powerful position. And I think that in relation to the intersex community, because it's a relatively small community, there's an extra responsibility there. They should be reaching out and engaging with intersex people in their organizations. And I think both Victor and Irene made this point really clearly. The responsibility is to listen and be guided by intersex people in the determination of priorities that affect them. So it shouldn't be for the Commission to decide separately what work it will do in relation to intersex human rights issues, but rather for those decisions to be made with their local intersex community. And then this is where I think they have a really valuable role to play when you have a small community, often of people who are, in very precarious economic positions and don't have the resources and the backing to do some of the really significant research. National human rights institutions do have that responsibility to research. And again, in all of this, I'm saying involving intersex people, not on their own, to research and publish authoritative, empirical, evidence-based human rights analysis and to tell the stories. And I think the other, actually, I probably should have put in another thing, because I think one of the roles we have, and these are things that I have seen develop within the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, and Tane will explain how they've been continued on. But I think we have a responsibility to open doors. So sometimes for a marginalized group, all the official doors are basically shut. But a National Human Rights Commission can open those doors and stand alongside intersex people as they engage with those who are making the decisions about their lives in the various areas of government. And finally, I think it's really important for national human rights institutions to connect intersex people in the organizations to the international human rights mechanisms. And you're obviously wonderfully connected now, but that wasn't always true in the past. And I think it is something that can be quite overwhelming when you're distant from Geneva or New York, and the expense of going there is enormous, and when you get there it can be overwhelming. And a national human rights institution should be able to assist the organization, the community, to connect in the variety of ways with the treaty bodies, like the convention, like the Commission on the Rights of the Child, and with the special rapporteurs. And of course, at the moment, you have a wonderful ally and support right there in the center in Victor. So just before handing over to Tane, I just wanted to give an illustration of that kind of, I guess, perhaps summarizes the approach that we took when I was at the Human Rights Commission. We after undertaking a review of how well human rights were recognised and respected in New Zealand, we'd identified the discrimination, extensive discrimination faced by trans people. And following that initial major review, we undertook to do a national inquiry into the discrimination faced by trans people. Now, trans people do not, intersex people are not trans people. That's absolutely correct. But, and this is where, again, I want to acknowledge Marnie. Marnie made submissions to that national inquiry as a way of making intersex people visible and as a way of saying, we are a group that need the Commission's attention. And as you can see there, just let me see if I can actually read that, because yeah. I mean, we did in fact include a chapter on intersex people, but we made it clear that and we acknowledged, and we tried to an extent to spell out some of the significant human rights issues faced by intersex people. We said these require urgent consideration, but we acknowledged they required broader consultation with intersex people and their families and with the relevant government agencies and health professionals. So that was one example I would like to say of a national human rights institution, and this was in the 2000s. So To Be Who I Am was published, I think, in 2006, 2007. So this was early days, but it lay a foundation for ongoing work by the Commission. And having said that, I should say that, of course, most organizations have their ups and downs, and I think our Human Rights Commission for a period took a different direction after I left, but before the new commission that we've got now, which is very committed and recognises intersex rights, as Tane will tell you, but even before that, again, partly because of the foundations that had been laid, but largely because of the advocacy of Marnie and the Intersex Trust, the Human Rights Commission again picked up its responsibility to work with the intersex community and to engage with the medical community. And it was wonderful to see the developments that arose out of that. And I would just like to end by saying, obviously, I'm no longer at the Human Rights Commission, but because of what I've learned and because of the enormous respect that I have for what has been achieved by the intersex community in New Zealand and the ongoing challenges that they face, I hope I've continued to be an individual ally, albeit no longer an institutional ally for the community. And I continue to learn. And as I said, it's fantastic to be here tonight and to be able to listen to the other contributions. And if you're wondering if there's a national human rights institution in your country, and I should have put it up on the website, on the PowerPoint, sorry, you can go to www.GANRI, which is the Global Assembly, the Global Association of National Human Rights Institutions.org, and you can get all the members in all the different countries there. So once again, thank you for having me. Kia ora koutou. Over to you, Tane.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. Tane.
Thank you, Tony, and all of the other speakers and organisers who've put this forum together. So many distinguished individuals on the call around the world. I'm so humbled to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Tane Polkinghorn, and I am the New Zealand Human Rights Commission's SOGIESC advisor. Thank you, Ros, for giving a bit of background to the New Zealand Human Rights Commission's work with intersex people, which, as Marnie often reminds me, goes back well over 20 years now. I wanted to bring the wishes, the best wishes of our current Chief Human Rights Commissioner, Paul Hunt, who sends his warmest to all of us this evening. He and our other colleagues is robustly supportive of the Commission's work with intersex people, and he was in fact a signatory to the original Yogyakarta Principles during his time as the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to the highest attainable standard of health. And Paul recently also wrote the foreword for a report that our Commission published back in June of this year, and I personally have had the privilege of accompanying him to some high-level meetings to discuss intersex human rights issues. The intersex community is doing such incredible work all over the planet and here too in Aotearoa. And as is true of any social issue, the people who are living it have the best understanding of the problems, but also how to best address them. I would hope that as an institutional ally to intersex people, that the New Zealand Commission sees the importance of upholding the rights and championing the issues of most importance to them as defined by them, which is a point that Ros made earlier and Victor too. My experience of being an ally to any group, population, community, and I hope that extends to intersex people, is to, one, never come empty-handed, and two, to come with deep humility. Because it's such a small group of people doing this work here, I can think of 5, maybe 6 out intersex people publicly doing this work in Aotearoa. There's so few of them, and we have to warmly celebrate their achievements and help them where we can. I would say that I'm in touch every week with Marnie and ITANS and Intersex Youth Aotearoa to discuss everything from planning local meetings to drafting submissions on domestic legislation or UN treaty bodies. Sometimes we are researching, sometimes we are simply reflecting on our progress and a job well done. We catch up on regional and international news together, and we are always thinking about new avenues and key decision makers who may be able to help us advance intersex issues. This change, it happens in battles that last much longer than weeks and months. It takes years, decades sometimes, as so many of you on this call will be aware, and certainly all of our chief commissioners since, and including Roslyn, have very much championed that. Roslyn was succeeded by David Rutherford, who preceded our current chief commissioner, Paul Hunt. I thought I would share something that I have learned from being in meetings with Marnie, which is something they talk about as stepping up and stepping back. And what they mean by this, or what I think they mean by this, is being aware of our own, I'm not sure if this is the right terminology, being aware of our own default positioning in meetings, whether we notice that we tend to speak a lot or to hold back from speaking. The Human Rights Commission organises regular meetings between civil society and the current Rainbow New Zealand Parliamentary Network, which is a non-partisan group of MPs who are either themselves Rainbow, LGBT, or supportive of Rainbow issues. And at a recent meeting, there was space for people to share with the MPs their experiences of COVID-19, you know, the current pandemic. In this meeting, stepping up and stepping back meant that the intersex voice came through very strongly. We know that people were not impacted uniformly by this pandemic, and a one-size-fits-all approach was going to leave some people behind. And so the Commission and the MPs heard some very valuable information at this meeting, including, for example, that some people needed medical information over and above what was made publicly available by the Ministry of Health. Or perhaps that COVID-19 exacerbated many intersex people's historical experiences of medical mistrust because the pandemic required the public to trust health professionals. And so given that there are so few intersex people doing this work, this meeting was an opportunity to raise those specific issues in a forum that would listen and be very respectful. And so to finish on this as my last comment, I would just like to say that to be effective, we as a commission must be flexible and meet the needs of rights holders, in this case, intersex people. We must meet the needs of rights holders and not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tane. Thank you. Okay, the next person is known, I'm sure, to every intersex person listening to this webinar, and that is my dear friend Ruth. So Ruth Baldacchino, Senior Program Officer, Intersex Human Rights Fund at Australia, and also former Co-Secretary General of ILGA, and overall wonderful person that is just an incredible ally to intersex people, but more than that, has really helped form an international intersex movement through the support that they have given us over the years. So Ruth, thank you very much for your ongoing leadership and support, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you, Tony. You're too kind, you know. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Ruth, as Tony said, and I've played different roles, I suppose, over the years in my support to the intersex movement. Primarily through my role in ILGA World, as a board member, and then as co-secretary general of ILGA. Then through the Ministry for Equality in Malta, and then through the Intersex Human Rights Fund at the Australia Foundation. So I thought, you know, when I got the invitation to participate, I kind of wasn't sure what to do and what to share with you. Also to think, you know, what's really an ally? You know, how does one become an ally? And so I thought I'd share a few stories with you on my journey, right, with the intersex movement. So as I said, I've been a board member of ILGA for a long time, and I want to share kind of how ILGA, as an LGBTI membership-based organization, has gone through well, several processes to become more intersex inclusive and to work with the intersex movement. So I want to go back to around 2008. Of course, intersex people have been in ILGA for a long time, and they've been in ILGA members for a long time. But in terms of representation and visibility, that took a while, you know, to happen. And so in 2008, during the World Conference of ILGA, which took place in Vienna, that was a very special conference for any of you who may know about that conference. All World Conferences are special, but Vienna was special too. And there was quite a few members of ILGA, you know, putting forward the idea that ILGA should change its name. We should add the I to the name. And that was a proposal that has been brewing for a few years and made it through to the Vienna conference. That proposal came through, the members voted for that. And so ILGA added the I to the name. And it became known as the International Lesbian, Gay, Bi, Trans and Intersex Association. And I want to also point and note that most of the people who fought really for the inclusion of intersex people included lots of trans activists from Latin America, and they've been crucial for ILGA to really recognize intersex people and their contribution to the organization. So there was also a proposal to set up an intersex secretariat at the time, but that didn't go through because it felt that ILGA didn't have enough intersex representations. But the conference then, the members recommended the board, the ILGA board, to include, the support of the intersex movement in part of it in our work, with the intention to do more outreach work to intersex organizations, and therefore having a bigger mandate than to push forward for more visibility within the organization. So I remember the first board meeting after that Vienna conference. We met in Brussels. And one of the questions that we were asked as a board was, now ILGA has the I added to the name. Now what are we going to do? What are we going to do as an organization that has just added I to the name? And the first reaction was from the board was, we don't know, because, and there was an acknowledgement that we didn't have enough knowledge, information, connections, about issues faced by intersex people, but also there was an acknowledgement and a commitment to consult intersex people directly, to figure out, right, what to do now. So we recognized the need to be proactive and step up. I like your comment there, stepping up and knowing when to step up and stepping back. And we reached out to, we started reaching out to a number of intersex activists, but that was also the time when we thought of creating a space where intersex people, we can support intersex people to come in the same physical space to discuss, to meet each other primarily, but also to discuss priorities, needs, concerns. And that's where the idea of the Intersex Forum came about as well. And so in 2011, together with ILGA Europe, we organized the first International Intersex Forum in Brussels. There were a few people, not all regions were represented equally, but it was a start of a bigger conversation and also an opportunity for people who already were connected online or through social media, but also an opportunity to meet in person. We've seen more intersex organizations emerging, more intersex members becoming, intersex organizations becoming members of ILGA. And then during the next World Conference in 2012, which was in Stockholm in December, and if you have any idea of how the weather is in December in Stockholm, it's very cold. It was another special conference, you see. So we had we supported once again ILGA and ILGA Europe, the second International Intersex Forum. This time there were more people, there was slightly more representation, but one thing that I recall very well was the increased visibility at the conference. I recall all intersex participants going up the stage and reading a statement from that forum saying, here we are intersex people at the conference at ILGA, here we are. And that's how ILGA as an organization also started to learn how to include intersex issues within its work, how to consult with intersex activists, how to plan its work, including intersex. And then in 2013, we had the third International Intersex Forum here in Malta. Of course, it's a special one for me too, because here I am in Malta. And that was also a shift also on how we did the Intersex Forum. There was a planning team. It was a facilitation led by intersex people. And that forum kind of became more known as for the declaration that intersex people, intersex participants of that forum agreed on. Sometimes it's known as the Malta Statement. Yeah, and one thing that maybe people know less though is the impact of that forum for Malta. Because what happened after the forum was that the Minister for Equality then, Helena Dalli, who also came to the forum, wanted, having listened to all participants at the forum, wanted also to do something in Malta in terms of legislation. And that's how some of us worked on the law in Malta. And then in 2015, that bill became law, the Gender Identity, Gender Expression and Sex Characteristics Act. And also one thing I want to say is that minister, Helena Dalli, is now European Commissioner for Equality. And I think it's important to mention that because of course, the direct experience of listening to intersex people as a minister also influences her position as well as European Commissioner. And of course, things went on and ILGA continued. In 2014, I was elected as co-secretary general of ILGA in Mexico. And also we saw the first election of the Intersex Secretariat. The first Intersex Secretariat was Natasha Jimenez from Costa Rica. And we became kind of more, it's a board position. So it means that we increased representation on the board as well. 2015, I know Irene referred to 2015 being a special year. As I said, many things happened in 2015. The law, the reports, many things were happening. And personally, it was also an important moment, as well as I left the Equality Ministry and I started my work at the Intersex Human Rights Fund at Australia, all in 2015. And yes, in my role as program officer of the Intersex Fund, my work then allowed me to work more directly with many of you on this webinar, many intersex organizations around the world. We started with a very small grant-making budget in 2015, supporting some 20-something organizations. 5 years later, we've just had our largest grant-making cycle where we're supporting 53 intersex organizations in 41 countries. And that is a reflection of the movement and how it's been growing and all the voices that's coming out of that and all the complications that come with any movement growth, of course. And through my work as program officer, I often say I don't just give the money, so I do more than that. And I've been so lucky, so privileged to be in positions to work directly with you on a regional level, on a local level as well. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey to be, working alongside intersex movement. ILGA's work, and I think I want to note the impact of the Intersex Fora on ILGA's work, because Intersex became more embedded in the organization, in all aspects of the organization, including the strategic plans and the programs and the advocacy work. But not only that, there was an increase in knowledge about intersex issues, about the human rights of intersex people, and consultation with intersex became part of integral part of ILGA's work. Of course, I'm going to name, we've changed structures in the meantime. We have an intersex steering committee, and in 2019 in Wellington, we elected Tony as chair of that intersex steering committee. So that marks another step, another chapter in ILGA's journey as well. Finally, I just want to note and share this reflection with you that there were times, probably many, where I got things wrong, where you challenged me as intersex activists at intersex communities, where you questioned my decisions, but also held me accountable. And I thank you for doing that. And I appreciate that, that relationship that I have with you and with the movement. I recognize that no matter how many years or how much work I do, I know there's always more to be done, that there is more I need to learn and understand, and there are times that I need to relearn things and maybe unlearn as well. Because the movement keeps growing, new perspectives keep emerging, and language keeps evolving as well. And it's with this spirit and the belief, that I approach and do my work as an ally, and hopefully more than an ally, to the intersex movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you. And I can't thank you enough, not just for participating today, but the years of support that you've given the intersex movement. So next, we have our last speaker, that's Rashima Kwatra. Rashima is the International Advocacy Advisor at RFSL, the Swedish Federation for LGBTQI Rights. Rashima's engagement with international human rights and advocacy on sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual characteristics issues has encapsulated policy development, advocacy, communications, research, strategic philanthropy at non-government organisations, foundations, and multilateral institutions in Asia, North America, and Europe. She's experienced at navigating the UN system and setting the agenda for change at national, regional, and international levels. She holds a Masters of Public Administration from Columbia University and is from beautiful Bangkok in Thailand, where we would have had our 5th International Intersex Forum in March this year had it not been for the pandemic. And we are still looking forward to having that 5th International Intersex Forum in person sometime next year. Thank you very much, Rashima, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Tony. I know being in Bangkok would have been, a win-win on so many levels. But I'm based in Stockholm now, and I agree with Ruth. Like the weather here is getting on the verge of being terrible soon. But I just want to say on behalf of RFSL, thank you so much for having us on board on this conversation. I would agree that we had some trepidations about coming on this panel and talking about allyship, when we really know that we have a long list to follow and the community to follow. So thank you for allowing us to share some of our experiences, and also acknowledging that we have a long way to go to ensure that we systematize the support of intersex organizing and groups in the work that we do. We know that we need to increase our capacities and our funding ability as well to intersex organizations. So thanks for this, and I hope we can have further constructive conversations about how and what it means to be a good intersex ally. I'd like to focus on a couple ways that RFSL has been able to support intersex organizing. And mainly, I would say we do it through 4 kind of pillars of engagement. One is through direct funding. Another is through capacity training and technical support, as well as in conducting advocacy and in advocacy support. And we try and work within these 3 pillars by leveraging the multiple synergies within our different programs, which are thematically based or regionally based. So in regards to direct funding, one way that we've been able to support the intersex community, or an approach that we think has been important, is through thinking about long-term program and long-term funding. As a donor organization, we realize that having long-term partnerships with organizations should be a conscious strategy. Oftentimes funding is very limited or is project-based, which then doesn't allow for the ability for organizations to build in systematic and sustainable approaches to the way that they work. And so specifically working with intersex groups, we provide very flexible funding in terms of how our funds are used. And really the main criteria that the organization or the funding has to follow is that it needs to be aligned with the particular program with which the funding comes from. So currently we partner with Intersex Asia, and that's part of our regional movement program. And so very loosely, it's about being making sure that LGBTIQ actors are able to operate and sustain their organizations, and that they should be a regional actor. We also develop our programs keeping in mind that the structures with which we work with need to be very flexible, and oftentimes the need for support changes with particular events that come up. And so as a donor organization, we're very flexible in the movement of the funding. And of course, we allow organizations to prioritize how and of what is of best value when we support them. And so it can be for core support, for salaries, or for particular activities and engagements. And we certainly follow the lead of the organizations with which we work with. We have been supporting Intersex Asia financially since 2019, but have been working with the organization since 2018. And the approach that we took in terms of the funding process was very much through dialogue, through cooperation, and through partnership. And that was to work with the organization to provide feedback on their application. We had conversations about identifying priorities and planned work, discussed how to use the results framework that we have, how to incorporate kind of monitoring and evaluation processes, and very much recognizing that working with underfunded groups or new groups and within organizations like ours, there's a huge tax and a huge burden on monitoring and reporting, which has been a challenge. And so we try and provide as much technical support in that capacity as possible. And we've found that that's been very helpful, although it doesn't, of course, meet all of the challenges in funding underrepresented groups, and specifically intersex groups. And it's been a very fruitful engagement, and we hope that the funding will be continued for a longer term strategy. And so hopefully this will be ongoing for another few years if that's possible. So that's one way we do it with direct funding. RFSL also supports intersex organizing through advocacy work and through the multiple trainings that we have. One of the trainings is called the Rainbow Advocacy Program, and it's a 13-month-long training opportunity with which we work with activists from the Global South and the Global East. And like with many of our other programs, we prioritize the support of underrepresented groups, intersex individuals and groups, of course, being one of them. So through the RAP training, which encompasses a human rights training in Geneva and engagement with Human Rights Council, and a development framework-based training in New York and engagement with the HLPF. We've had intersex activists be part of that group. And as part of that also, we dispersed a small scale funding, about 7,000 euros for the activists and their organization to implement an advocacy project. We also have a training called the Rainbow Academy. And these Rainbow Academy trainings very much meet the needs of organizations and partners with which we work. And so this is one way that we can also fill the gaps, let's say, that organizations might raise that, okay, we really need training on how to fundraise, on donor mapping, on how to write funding reports and funding applications. And so we will use the Rainbow Academy training to offer that. And we've done that in the past with our partners from Southern Africa, with which intersex organizations and groups were involved. And we had a technical officer who was available for one-on-one engagement on writing proposals, reviewing proposals, and providing technical capacity. As an organization, we also provide this opportunity with our partners at any time of the year. I think that's something that we could certainly work on communicating better, on communicating more, and having bigger outreach to our organizations to say that we are always available in working with them on these technical issues. And we look forward to doing that. We look forward to doing that a lot more. And that, as I mentioned, is the third pillar of capacity training and technical support. As being part of this panel, I was also asked to share some of the challenges that RFSL has faced in working with supporting intersex organizations and working with supporting intersex organizing in particular. And I mentioned this before, but I'll just reiterate a couple of these points, which is that we recognize very much that that groups that are generally underfunded are often also a little bit inexperienced in working with funding from donors. Some of the organizations we've worked with, we're the first international donor that they've received funding for, and you know, RFSL being predominantly supported by the Swedish government, has many of our own kind of taxing, incredibly onerous reporting mechanisms in place. And that, unfortunately, that burden gets placed on the partners with which we work. And so getting grants, let's say, from us requires that the organization has some structures to manage the grants, and that they have staff to do that as well. And we know that that's been a bit prohibitive. But hopefully in working with these organizations and in finding ways that perhaps we can support bringing somebody on board, that's one way we've been trying to meet these challenges. But of course, it's an ongoing process and ongoing conversation. And we recognize that this is something that, you know, as a donor community, but also engaged in activism, that this is something that we generally need to try to change, to lower the barriers that prevent financing, and that also prevent and minimize the burden that we have with some of our partners. One of the ways that we've been trying to do that as an organization is to try and fundraise from different streams of support, so that we have more flexibility with who we can support and how. And we've been successful in doing that, and then creating this really exciting small scale funding program called Rainbow Kickoff. And these are, you know, our attempts at trying to do small scale grants that are between 3,000 to 6,000 euros approximately. And it works to support LGBTIQ initiatives on mobilization, to help with community engagement, to create visibility, and that they're very short and time-bound support. So it could be to create meeting spaces. It could be to help with some salary needs of partners. And so we're looking into trying to expand that program. And in our last round, we were able to support one intersex group out of 7, and also provide capacity training for 2 intersex groups within the frame of that Rainbow Kickoff on fundraising. Another challenge that we have identified is that in many of the programs that we do currently have, or in the training opportunities that we have, even though they are focused on prioritizing underrepresented groups, that we do have a low level of intersex organizations either taking the steps of to applying or showing interest. And I think, you know, on our end, we could do certainly a much better job in using more inviting language, using more accessible language, finding partners with which we can better disseminate calls for engagement or call for applications. Although when we do have applicants, we definitely, as I said, prioritize engagement from underrepresented groups. We've also recognized that language is one barrier. In so many ways, our language of working, at least in the international unit, is in English, and so is our reporting. And that's also what we use to communicate our opportunities. And so that in and of itself, like much of the work that we do, limits who we can work with and how. And the last thing I will talk about in terms of the challenges and trying to keep this really short also is that in line with having onerous obligations for financial reporting, many intersex groups and other underrepresented groups also are not registered, which in some ways provides a bit of a complication or a barrier for RFSL to provide support, at least financially. And one way that we've tried to systematize and tried to work with, and you know, as an organization, although we've been funding for many years, we just really started finding ways to do this a couple of years ago, and that's through working with fiscal hosts. And so Intersex Asia is a great example of this. Because they have not been registered, we work with ILGA Asia and provide a small fee for the financial burden and the accountability on that end, so that they can be the fiscal host of Intersex Asia, so that we could basically ensure that we can still fund organizations and groups where it's needed and find a way to be able to do that. Again, as an organization, there's still so much that we need to learn, and we are definitely prioritizing this, and we hope that in the years to come, we can really expand the work that we do, following in the lead of intersex groups and organizations and partners with which we work. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rashima. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm just very mindful of time. We've been answering questions in the Q&A section as it's been happening, but I think, Marnie, you had a question that you were going to answer live. So would you like to answer that now, please, perhaps?
I'll try to. The question is, why is the A in the alphabet soup? The I, sorry, not the A. And it's hard to give a simple answer, but I'll try. So the intersex issue has been sits inside a pathologized medical framework. And medicine for the last 50 years has tried to normalize intersex people. So intersex people are people who are born intersex or have variations of sex characteristics. And the medical model has seen the normal body as a heterosexual body. Now within that, intersex people are all across the map. So the conjunction is, we as a community are highly stigmatized as people who have a different sexual orientation and a different gender identity. That's a very simple answer, and there's a lot more to say to that. But I believe absolutely, and I think everybody on the panel believes, that I people appropriately sit within the rainbow scenario. So thank you, Tony. It's clear from the questions that we could carry on for hours. We're not going to tonight. I just want to thank people for their questions and thank everybody for their gifts. Really, this is the start of a process, I think. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Marnie. I will try and wrap up now, but I think what we've seen from tonight is that we have some amazing intersex allies, and we've heard from a number of them tonight. Some takeaway messages is about thinking about when to use the I and when not to. The issues with tokenism that Victor mentioned very well. Listening to intersex people and intersex-led organisations and to amplify their work and voices. And I love that expression about knowing when to step up, when to stand back, and who to ask when you're not sure. I think that's a great message. I would like to acknowledge so many people, but I'd like to thank everybody that's attended here tonight. I'd like to thank ILGA World, especially Julia and Mfatso for all their work. So thank you very much for all your work. I'd like to really acknowledge the International Intersex Virtual Forum Organising Committee. They've gone over and above. This group has gotten together to actually organise the forum that we were going to have in Bangkok in March. And it's still been regularly meeting all through the year. And we decided to have these virtual forums, not in lieu of, but in addition to the in-person meeting that we will have next year. So I really thank them all. And I really want to also stress that they're not just members from the ILGA regions, they are intersex people from organisations all globally, all working together. So I thank them very much. I thank Australia for all their work. I thank all the panelists, Irene, Victor, Rosalind, Tane, Ruth, Rashima, thank you very much. And all the attendees and for everybody that's asked questions. Finally, I'd just like to end by saying, have a great Intersex Awareness Day on Monday. And that's why this timing is around this. So enjoy Intersex Awareness Day next Monday. Please feel free to share. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of the social media messaging and memes and all that sort of stuff that'll be out there on Monday and that I've already seen out there. So thank you very much to all of you for participating. I look forward to discussing tonight's session with the Intersex Organising Committee, because I am sure that we'll be having another webinar, perhaps more of a workshops type, to discuss, how to actually be an ally and what to do for individuals and organisations. So thank you, Victor. Great to see you. Put your camera on again. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody that's participated.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a lovely,
Thanks very
lovely day and
much.
night.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.